Hi, I'm Ed Bacon, the rector of All Saints Church, Pasadena. Whoever you are and wherever you find yourself on the journey of faith, I hope that you'll find something here that speaks to you. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. Let's get started. Sorry, the service went a little long. I am thrilled about this moment in our lives. I'm thrilled about our speaker. He has become a friend of my heart and soul. I'm going to leave it up to someone else to introduce him, for he will do a better job of introducing Frankie Carrillo. But I've been around Frankie 2 or 3 times since his release from prison. His story is so redemptive, and also it's indicting. It's certainly a warning to us about what we can do that is harmful in our criminal justice system. And as we start on our campaign of developing people who will help us work to abolish the death penalty in California, it's such a wonderful moment to have Frankie come and tell us about the story and also call us to responsible action. But it's fitting for Juan Mejia to introduce him. Juan Mejia is a great member of All Saints Church. He and his wife Diana and their children are here. Diana serves on the vestry now. Juan did serve on the vestry. They both, interestingly enough, are attorneys in the district attorney's office. And it was because of courageous work on behalf of Juan, I think that Frankie's team of defending attorneys gained increasing encouragement. So Juan, he along with some other members in this parish who've worked to get people released from prison who were falsely accused and falsely imprisoned. It's just kind of in my pantheon of great justice workers. So, but it's his story to tell, and I want Juan to come now and do that. Will you warmly welcome our own parishioner, Juan Mejia?
I don't think I could ever do a better job of introducing than Ed Bacon, but I'll do my best. I always say that Frankie and I met at work, and that's kind of true. I'm a prosecutor with LA County. I handle habeas corpus petitions when they come into us, and I got Frankie's petition in the summer of 2010, and I took a look at it. I investigated it. Maybe I was a little bit cynical because we do get these all the time where they're saying I'm innocent, and you look at it and they're truly not. So, but we did, with an open mind, take a look at it. And what I want to do really quickly, I don't want to take, you're not here to hear me, you're here to hear Frankie, but I want to set up the framework for what happened. Why did Frankie spend almost 20 years in prison? In January 18th, 1991, in the city of Linwood, in the evening, there were 6 young men hanging out, talking, laughing, having a good time, when one of these young men's father, Donald Sarby, came out and said, "It's time to come in. It's getting too dark." Approximately 7:30. It's in January, and as he's doing that, a car drives by with some Latino young men and fires shots at these young men. And Donald Sarby is hit in the stomach and dies on the sidewalk in front of his 16-year-old son. Now, quickly the law enforcement arrives and starts investigating. One of these young men is taken to the sheriff's station and is asked to look at a gang book. At the time, there's a war going on between black gangs and Latino gangs in Linwood. He looks at this book, and out of 190 pictures, he picks Frankie's picture. So based on that, Frankie's arrested about a week later. And approximately 6 months later, the other witnesses, the other 5 young men, identify Frankie from a 6-pack photograph. We use 6-packs generally in law enforcement. There are 6 photographs of similar-looking individuals, and you ask a witness, "Can you see the person that did the crime?" they all picked photo number 1. 6 witnesses saying that Frankie Carrillo was the shooter. They testified at trial that Frankie Carrillo was the shooter. They said they went to high school with him. I'll tell you what, as a prosecutor, I take that case. Usually you don't get 6 eyewitnesses saying, not only was it him, but I know him. So during the first trial, the jury hung 7-5 for not guilty. He was retried. During the second trial, that first witness, the one who picked the photograph, the first one, he recanted. He says, I made a mistake. It's not him. Yet the other 5 witnesses were even stronger in their testimony, and Frankie Carrillo was convicted and sentenced to multiple life sentences. He was 16 years old at the time of his arrest. Frankie, we later learned, or he testified, and the evidence was that he was at home in Maywood with his father doing homework when the shooting took place. He testified. The jury didn't believe him. So he spent the next 19 years fighting for his freedom and to prove that he was wrongly convicted. And it took several years to find an attorney that would take his case. A state public defender by the name of Ellen Eggers finally took the case and began a journey of 4 years working on her own time, trying to find a team that would take on this case. And she got a law firm in Los Angeles and San Francisco called Morrison Forster and the Northern California Innocence Project to take on the case with her. And then they brought the case to us. And we looked at it as well and investigated it. And during this time, the witnesses, one by one, recanted their testimony. And eventually, at a hearing last year in March, all of the witnesses recanted their testimony. They all said, to one degree or the other, it was too dark to see. And that the first witness told us during those 6 months who to pick. That they all said to one degree or another, that first witness assured us he was sure who the shooter was, so we just went along with what he told us. So that's why we picked photograph number 1. So it was a tainted identification. And also, we also learned in subsequent years that there was another individual who basically confessed to doing the shooting. So Frankie spent 20 years in prison for a murder that he did not commit. And in today's, the way today's laws are, Frankie was tried as an adult then. He could be tried as an adult today. He could be facing the death penalty if certain factors are met because it's a drive-by shooting involving a gang. So it's a remarkable story, and what's remarkable about it is that Frankie never gave up. Frankie fought for his freedom. Frankie always believed in the justice system, even though it had failed him when he was so young. Since his release, Frankie and I have become good friends. I'm proud to say that the very first Sunday after his release from custody, he came to All Saints and worshiped with us. So without further ado, Frankie Carrillo.
Good morning. Thank you, Juan, Ed. It's great to be back. Like Juan clearly stated, 4 days after my release, I was here. It was my honor to be. My presence was requested, and so I showed up. And to return back, 15 months later, with the theme of being freedom and liberty and justice for all, it's refreshing and very, very important to me to return, especially today. As Juan clearly pointed out, my story is very tragic. My story is not only my story, it's all of our stories. It's a story of our society. It's a story of society gone wrong, or just people lying, people making mistakes. But I want to talk about the journey of incarceration, my journey of 20 years in prison. So I was 16 years old. I was confused. I was naive. I was afraid. I was alone. I was convicted. I was sent away to live the rest of my life in prison. one of the things that sort of kept me going, and I shouldn't say sort of, it literally did, was this childhood memory of that I couldn't get out of my head, of this pledge that I took every morning in elementary school, of the Pledge of Allegiance. It not only helped me during my trial, it also helped me during my incarceration, of hoping and praying that what I believed in would manifest and we would be okay and things would sort of work out for me. And I think I've made the mistake a couple of times of telling people what I just shared with you when I was in prison. And they laughed at me, and they made me feel like a fool for believing in the system that had let me down. But I really believed in the last line, justice for all. And looking back now, I think I can understand why people laughed at me. But I'm grateful, and I thank God that I persevered and I didn't give up. And so that specific line and that specific belief and hope got me through a very, very difficult time in my life. I needed to not only live out an incarceration that, people talk about the tunnel, the light at the end of the tunnel. In my case, there was no tunnel. But there was hope. I can recall a very brief story that I just can't forget. I was 18 years old, and I had been assigned an appellate attorney who was supposed to look over the case and make sure, this was going to be another moment to look it over, make sure there was justice can sort of seep in. And we lost. He tried, we lost. And he sent me a box with my transcripts, and it said, with the letter that said, Frankie, we gave it our best shot, but this is as far as we can go, and I'm sorry, but your appeal has been denied. But if you want to continue on your own, here's a brief summary of what you have to do. And by the way, you have to do it in 30 days. And the mission was to basically petition the California Supreme Court to hear my case. And there was no time to hire an attorney. There was no time to think, but just to act. And so I asked a friend of mine to let me borrow his typewriter. Another friend borrowed his dictionary. And finally, I got some paper, and I wrote a 2-page petition. And in my mind, it wasn't a petition. It was more of a cry for help. It was more of a Mayday, Mayday, I need help. And so I sent the letter out, and very hopeful that the answer would be what I wanted. And so a few months went back, and I got that letter, and it said, I was really excited. It had a great font on the front, very old English sort of style, California Supreme Court, and I couldn't wait to tear into it to finally hear the words that I was yearning for. Basically, help has arrived. We're here for you, Frankie. So I go back to my cell, and I tear the letter open, and before I can read the actual paragraph, basically the 2 sentences that were returned back to me, my eyes were drawn to the bottom corner that said, with the big red stamp, denied. And so I begin to cry, and I read basically just that my case was again, not going to be looked at, and the conviction was going to stand. But I recall, and looking back now, I'm grateful that they sent me back what I had sent them, which was a 2-page petition, letter basically. And I looked this thing over, and I realized that I had misspelled my name. Yeah, thanks for laughing. It made no sense. It was too emotionally loaded. It was clear that I was trying my best, but I wasn't getting nowhere. And I was embarrassed. I really felt that I had given up an opportunity, one of maybe only 1 or 2 opportunities to be heard. I had blown it. And I blame myself for not being adequate and not being smart enough to convey what needed to be conveyed, which was that I was not the person who shot that gun. I was not there. And instead of that moment sort of moving me deeper into that pit, it sort of awakened me to realize that I needed to, I guess when it came down to it, just basically realize and learn and educate myself and realize how to structure a sentence and a paragraph, and if this was ever going to happen again, I was going to be ready. And so I went to school. And once I sort of figured that, I had enough under my belt, I started writing letters, and I wrote and wrote and wrote for 15 years. But the bizarre thing about then and now is, although I sort of felt that my words were my voice, they weren't. There was no power behind them. It seemed like there was just no force behind them. But I attempted. That was my only opportunity to reach out, so I did it. And so, lo and behold, so now I'm going to move forward here. I'm in Folsom, so about the 15th year of my incarceration. And a woman by the name of Tony Carter is a teacher there who I worked for. I was her teacher's aide, and she was the teacher there for a GED class. And I would help the guys, do their work and study, and if they have any questions, they would either come to me or her. And Tony just surprised me one day by telling me that she's going to be retiring, and this will be her last week. And she was basically just informing me that she's going to leave, and that I should start looking for another job. And so I said, okay. And that night, I went back to my cell and, showered and read and watched TV and went to bed. And I had a dream. And the dream was very fuzzy, and I couldn't really remember any sort of imagery, but all I can remember was this profound message, which was, ask Tony to help you. That's it. And I'd known Tony for about 4 years by that point. I had never requested anything from her. And she knew my story. But I figured, I'm not going to bother her. She has her life. What can I even ask from her? Nothing. I just work for her. And so I did it. I just was moved to say, Tony, on her last day, when I gave her a hug goodbye, I said, Tony, if you happen to run into an attorney or a reporter or someone who you think might be interested in my story, would you please just pass it along? And so that seemed basically a pretty basic, request. So she agreed. That was no big deal. And so I felt very hopeful that, hey, here's another form that my message was going to get out. And so it left the walls of Folsom, and there it went. And so about 6 months later, Tony's at a party in Sacramento, and the woman that Juan mentioned, Ellen Eggers, is also there. So she stands and she says, in her commentary for whatever was going on there, that she was an attorney and so on, and it triggered Tony's memory as about Frankie and the message. So at some point, Tony and Ellen start talking, and Tony didn't forget. She did her part and just passed along the message. And soon after, as you guys heard, the story goes that Ellen then got the services of Morrison and Foerster and the Northern California Innocence Project. And obviously, that led to a hearing, and so I'm finally home. But I think about the way God worked in my life. I think about what would have happened if I would have not had that dream, had that urge, had the courage to say, Tony, would you help? I definitely would not be here. But I think about the things that encouraged me during my incarceration. And at this point now, I've been wearing this thing around my wrist here with this multicolored sort of, weird little thing here, bracelet, I guess. And people ask me, and I don't. Sometimes I share it, sometimes I don't. But I just like it. But I wear it because it's a reminder of another anchor, another story, another powerful force, I suppose, that helped. And that's the story of Joseph in the Bible. There weren't many guys, or many people, or many stories that I was able to relate to or relate with. But when I found that specific story in the Bible, it was really encouraging to know that everything was going to be okay. I don't know when, how, but everything was going to be okay. And so the memory of Joseph and his multicolored robe is sort of my personal reminder that everything is okay and will be okay. And so I'm home. I've been home now for 15 months. I love life. I really do. You know, a friend of mine recently told me that I shouldn't be so happy. Seriously, the guy, he was really serious when he told me this too. He's like, you know, you're being too happy, man. Like, tone it down a little bit, right? So you know what, I wasn't sure kind of where he was coming from, so I didn't want to argue. I just said, all right, man, like, I'll tone it down, you know. But it's a reminder of what I thought and what I perceived the world to be when I was in prison. See, this all happened when I was so young that I hadn't even made a mark in my own family. No one knew who I was. My life hadn't even begun yet. I'm sure my classmates might have remembered me or had a memory of me as a boy, or my dad or a brother, but no one knew who I was. And so when I was in prison, I would think about, fantasize of, wow, you know, what an amazing world it is, what an amazing opportunity it is to be free, to have choices, to be able to just enjoy just the blessing to be alive. And it's ironic that man's comment reminded me of just what a beautiful life we all have. And speaking of a moment in that beautiful new life of mine, I was on vacation for a week. So friends of mine who are like my family, we went to Mexico for a 1 week, basically private yacht tour to the Sea Cortez. It was a beautiful, beautiful experience. Beaches and dark skies with tons of stars and bright moon and great food and great company, and we played bridge, and it was a lot of fun. But I was thinking about, shockingly, I was thinking about prison when I was on that boat, thinking about being disconnected from the world, and thinking about who I missed and what I was thinking about. And it reminded me of prison. In some weird way, it reminded me of the time when I was disconnected and just sort of flown around. And I one night panicked. It was about, I don't know, everyone was asleep on the boat. And I got up and I just went out to the front of the boat and just sat there and I just couldn't believe what was going on. I couldn't believe that. Not only that I was free, but that I was happy. But I can believe it. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing to go through a very tragic experience and be able to persevere and not allow your soul to be stripped from its beauty And so the trip ended yesterday, and we were on the yacht, and soon after we were on a plane heading home. So I midway through the flight back to Los Angeles, I realized that it was June 30th, the anniversary of the day that the jury came back and announced me guilty. And I would always remember that day during my incarceration. June 30th was the day I heard the words guilty. And I kind of sort of wish I would have forgot that it was June 30th. But what's great about that is that I can now replace June 30th with my new June 30th, which was the day I was flying home from that amazing trip. But I want to just, and I'm sorry guys for shifting all over the place here and bouncing around, because the story can just, I'm like that boat now. I'm just kind of just floating all over the place here. But I want to maybe just drop my anchor here and talk about the SAVE campaign. And talk about, like what Juan alluded to, that I could have been that guy. I could have been that person who was sent to death row. Thank you. If I've had the privilege to, be tapped on the shoulder and said, Frank, would you help us on this campaign to end the death penalty? And without really thinking about it, I just said, sure. Will I get paid? And they're like, yeah, a little bit, but but I said, sure, I'll jump in. And some people were sort of again mocking and saying, Frankie, like, what are you doing, man? Like, you just left prison. The last thing you should be worried about or thinking about is prison or prisoners, But I ignored all that, and I recalled the moments in which I would send out those letters that I was talking about, and the people who never responded, and sort of just, I'm sure they got it. It never came back to me, so I'm sure they got it and read it. And so what helped me say yes and say, yeah, I'll get involved, is because now that I have an opportunity to define myself, I don't want to be the person who hears about something and does nothing. I want to be the person who hears about something and is moved to get involved. I want to be the person who has compassion, who can think, who can reason. And so I do what I do. It makes me feel alive. It makes me feel good. I was at another talk here maybe a few months ago, and there was a man in the audience who said, Frankie, after hearing you speak, I'm glad I didn't become an attorney. He says, I couldn't bear the idea that I could have been who represented you and would have failed you, and you would have been sent to prison unjustly because of my inadequacy or my inability to point out that you're innocent. And I was almost, it hurt me to point out to him. It really hurt me to point out to him that you don't have to be you don't have to be an attorney to be brought into this mess. And of course, he looked at me like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Sir, I'm assuming you're a great man who pays your taxes and votes and gets that envelope in the mail that says you've been selected to be a juror." He says, "Yeah." He's like, "Yeah, that's me. I'm a good man who pays taxes, and I'm on that list." And I said, tragically, you can be called in, taken through the process, and selected to be on a jury. And if people are not playing fairly and people are lying, you will be manipulated to believe something that is not correct. Not by any fault of your own, but you're just being sort of manipulated there to think and decide the way they want you to, based on whatever side. So imagine that. Imagine that from that point of view. We want to help. And it hurt me, maybe the look that he gave back to me, maybe he didn't think it through that far. And I guess that just leads me to the point that, there's flaws throughout the entire system. Whatever system we're talking about, doesn't matter. But I still believe in it. the person who has been victimized by it, I suppose, if I can still believe in it, it speaks of the system that we all love and adore and hope that when it's our turn, it works in our favor. And so I think about what happened on March 16, which was the day that I walked out as a free man. Went in as a boy and walked out as a free man. And I think about today's one of today's readings, and it just stuck with me about you too shall love you should also love a stranger. And prior to March 16th, I was a stranger. No one knew who I was. And I suppose until it made it to the LA Times and the local media got wind of my story, that people started hearing about my story. But prior to that, no one knew who I was. No one, other than my family and friends and my attorneys, were aware that I even existed. And so I say that to say that with the campaign to end the death penalty, there has to be someone, a man, a woman, who is a stranger, who is unknown, who we don't know who their name is, the same way my name wasn't on anyone's mind, that needs to stay alive to prove their innocence. And ending their lives and executing them will only rob them from the opportunity of correcting an injustice. And so my involvement is to specifically remind people of that. Not only that it could have been me, but also that people need to stay alive for many different reasons, but more specifically when it just makes it easy for me to connect these dots here so they can have an opportunity to correct a wrong. So thank you for listening, and if there's any questions...
Wonderful. Thank you. Stay right here. This is the first question. If you have a second question, raise your hand. We'll get to the microphone to you so you can be ready to ask. Go ahead, Bill.
Frankie, thank you for coming. What a story, what a story. My question has to do with if you have animosity towards the 6 men who claimed that you were the shooter, and since you've gotten out, have you had an opportunity to talk to them, to meet with them, or even if you haven't, what's going on internally with you and emotionally with you with that in that regard?
That's a great question. So, first of all, there's no animosity, there's no negativity, or anger that lives in me towards them. There was actually, during the hearing, there was almost a scene like out of the movies. So the initial now grown man who initially picked my picture that late night, he's apologizing, and he's in open court, really pouring out his heart. Really seemed like his conscience, he was trying to clear his conscience of the pain that he was carrying around with him. And he just kind of goes off track and just looks at me and sort of stands and says, "Frankie, I'm sorry." And I sort of stand, I'm like, I'm supposed to just sort of sit there and not be heard. And I stand, I said, I accept your apology. I forgive you, is what I said. I forgive you. I forgive you. And I really do. I really do. I think that moment was just, it sort of manifested, and there it was, but in the courtroom. But it had happened many, many years prior, where I just realized that these young boys were victims on so many different levels. They were victims, and I knew that they were mistaken. I knew that there was something else going on here, and I never viewed them as being the problem or being they should be the recipient of my anger. What's going on now? It's a mystery to me. It really is a mystery to me that people have sort of been in awe or sort of shocked that how I've been able to handle this so graciously, I suppose is the word that people have been using, and I can't take credit for that. I can't say, yeah, it's because I read a book or I did a lot of push-ups. I don't know.
Is there another question over here? And is there another hand? I want to go ahead and get the mic to you so you can.
Hi.
Please.
Thank you for sharing and being so generous. I just wondered, is there an organization or are there people that help you when you get out of prison to sort of reintegrate? I mean, you've missed 20 years of a lot of things that are going on, and there must be culture shock and all of that. Are there people that help with that?
The Wood Foundation. It's Jeannie and Scott Wood, who are sitting here in the second row. Family and friends. There's if there is, I'm not aware of who they are. What's interesting about someone who's exonerated is that compared to someone who's paroled, and as a parolee, you have services and a number of health care and anything else I think that you need. They're there to help you. But as an exonerated man, they just let you go. Yeah, which is okay too. So. But I mentioned Jeannie and Scott Wood because I met Scott during my journey, and he in many ways helped me, and because of Scott, I am also free. And he's been gracious enough to allow me to live with he and his wife, and so thank you.
That was going to be my question. Whether you've applied for work, what has been your experience? Have you had difficulty? Do you have to put down that you've been in prison? Have you experienced that?
So I haven't. I recently got pulled over, but I'll share that in a minute. So I just realized that 25 days after my odyssey, and I'm home now, I moved on something very quickly, one of my dreams in life, which is to go to school. So I, without asking or really running this by too many people, other than one person, Scott, I said, I want to go to LMU. I want to be a student. And so after a couple phone calls and made some appointments, we went and met with President David Burcham, and I'll kind of get to the chase here. Soon after, I was accepted as a full. I was accepted as a student there. So. It's been a great honor to be at LMU for many reasons. So I can go on and on, but I won't about that. But as to the thing about work, so I'm working now, and the people who I'm working for are aware of my story. So there was never, I don't think there was even an application. I think I just maybe signed a contract, but there was no application. But I want to share this thing about being pulled over. So I was. I was driving in San Diego 2 weeks ago, and I was a little late, so I needed to go there and speak at a church. And I was speeding. I was on the 73 heading south and toll road. I'm thinking, toll road, you pay to sort of speed, you gotta you gotta free sort of, you can kind of kick into another notch here. So I knew it was dangerous when I was kind of going downhill and the wheel started shaking a little bit, and it was like almost 90, 87 to be exact, 87. So the officer pulls me, the CHP pulls me over, and what am I going to say? I'm like, yes, I was speeding, and so it was very polite. It was really nice. I was shocked, but I was afraid because I was sort of dreading the moment where my name is going to be ran, and oh my God, who knows what was going to come up. And so I signed the ticket, and he says, you'll get something in the mail in a couple of days, maybe a week, telling you forms of payment. Maybe you can do it over a money order. So he's explaining the process of how I can pay for the ticket. And he says, but if September rolls around and you don't hear from us, just realize the court makes mistakes. And I said, I'm well aware of that. But I haven't got the actual number, but I'm sure it's going to be in the hundreds. But I'm grateful that I don't mind paying that ticket, and I will pay it. But it's just out of nowhere a reminder of something so tragic, like getting pulled over. I mean, come on, it's not that tragic, but I mean, you're getting pulled over, and for it to even turn into a joyous moment for me, now that I'm sort of sharing and laughing with you all here, but.
So before we thank Frankie, I want to let you know that he and I are doing a dialogue sermon at 1 o'clock at the Eucharist. If anybody wants to come back, it's going to be quite a trip. We don't know what we're going to do, but we trust the Holy Spirit to lead us. And do we have, Carissa, we have safe materials here, or we do? So if we want every member of All Saints Church to do our part, remember that part of Frankie's presentation about action. We want all of us to do our part to pass this initiative to bring an end to the death penalty in the state of California. It will be quite a victory, and it will begin, I think, will certainly add our California weight to a movement and a tipping point of abolishing this horrible, horrible thing where we actually have the state to murder a human being on our behalf. So please take action. And now join me in thanking Frankie Correa.